welcome everyone to our free support webinar on the healing power of breath, integrating therapeutic breathwork into your practice.
Thinking body, what's an experiment with that? Well, I might ask a person to say, I deserve to be loved. Whoa, there's a new thought. I mean, you didn't say the words, but does it sink in? Am I willing to experiment with that thought? Or I love myself. Woo. I mean, that sounds so simplistic. But again, if we have those tools of tracking, what happens in my body when I say that? What do I notice about my breathing when I started to talk about getting spanked as a child? Can we have this conversation now and focus more on the feelings than the facts and start to map what we do in life? For example, in my life, anger was forbidden in my family. When I first went to graduate school and was in a group, and I would use humor, sarcasm, and I was called on it. And I was like, well, what's wrong with these people? Don't they have any sense of humor? So my passive aggressive anger was news to me. But with the honest feedback, I was able to then recognize what I do when I'm feeling anger is just life energy with the thought I'm not getting what I want. Very simplistic. When I'm not getting what I want, how my chest, and then how I can be very polite, but I distance myself from others. I had to learn a whole new vocabulary. What's emotional expression? Or even what feelings do I have?
Really good. Thank you for sharing the principles there. What are clients' most common challenges or resistances when you're first introducing breathwork, and how do you help them overcome them?
Well, if you step back from it and you look at, you're laying down, some person's sitting next to you, watching you breathe. That's a pretty vulnerable position. Now, people who've done a lot of self-work, and it's like, well, okay, no big deal, and they can do that. But for a lot of people, asking themselves to be that open and vulnerable is a setup for them to feel watched, observed, criticized, and most common, almost to the person that I've ever introduced and coached them in breathing. What's the first thing that they think of? Am I doing this right? And so people come to me, and unless they have done breath work and they're familiar with it, we do a lot of preliminary talking and exploration in order to create that safety. There's one gentleman that I work with who's had complex trauma, abuse as a child. I don't sit next to him. I'm across the room. We found a distance that he has said that he's safe with for him even to lay down and breathe. So resistance to being that open, being that vulnerable, or to feeling the feelings that come out. So again, I will tell people in this, for some people, it's very physical. You're just going to experience a number of sensations. And here's what we do. We learn how to breathe through these things rather than let's stop now and discuss this or analyze it. We learn how to feel comfortable as physical sensation comes up. Oh, there's that knee injury. Oh, I'm going to get a Charlie horse. Oh, so we learn to release into parts of our body that may have been held most of our life. So emotionally, feelings will start to come up. Wow, I'm paying this guy good money and I'm just sitting here breathing and he's watching me. I'm irritated. I, for example, was not at all comfortable with my anger. And it wasn't until I had a breath worker, this is in my own training, that I had a breath worker who was very comfortable with his anger. And he was also comfortable in me getting angry, which he proceeded to do by telling me to lay down, breathe, and going in the kitchen and having lunch. What? How can you? And then he was the first breath worker that I didn't fall asleep on, because whenever I would get angry or anger would come up, I would check out and I would learn to not be there in my body. So we work with the resistances of the feelings coming out, of being exposed to vulnerability, or for some people, they will have memories or thoughts will come up of their history all the way back to birth or even before that, interuterine. So we learn how to deal with thoughts that are out of the ordinary. We learn to deal with thoughts that are even extraordinary, or experiences that are extraordinary, as Stan Grof called non-ordinary states of consciousness. And we have to have a very solid foundation in ethics and self-knowledge to be working with people in non-ordinary states of consciousness. And not everyone should or needs to go to those places, but for those that are ready for it, we have to also then be ready to support them in the fears, the thoughts that come up. And so I've had a lifelong experience of all sorts of things coming out. People open the floodgates of their consciousness and then supporting them in integration, because that's what it's all about. Back in the early days of breath work, these were not healthcare people that started exploring the modern version of breath work. Now, breath work and breathing techniques have gone back millennia in China, India, Tibet, shamanistic practices all over the world. Breath work is not new. But the modern day formulation of breath work, now we're finding out things about neurobiology, finding out things. But when this exploration began in the Wild West days, I would say, of rebirthing, as it was called, it was like, let's just blow out the circuits and breathe and see what happens. I soon recognized we have to learn from experience, have some guidelines of safety and ethics, which led me to helping to found the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance, which is a professional organization of people doing breath work who agree to a set of standards in training and the standards in ethics. This also, the original question is dealing with resistance. It also addresses people's fears. What am I getting into? Is this person watching a YouTube video and they're now trying it out on me?
Thanks, Jim. Juliet, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, Jim, I'm just wondering, can you give us some examples of how, like, do you ask people to breathe certain ways? Do you watch their breath and have them just pay attention to it? Are there specific breathing exercises you give them to do?
All of the above. Everything that you just said, and it will depend on the individual. First of all, we talk about it. Second of all, while they're sitting down and we're having a conversation, I may introduce breath awareness. Now, what do you notice about your breathing? And we might even do some experimentation. Even before we do a formal session, we are introducing the concept of being aware of and modulating your breath. And then I tell people about what the technique is. It involves laying down and using a connected breathing rhythm for a certain amount of time. Here are the things that may happen during that: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Here's what we do in those circumstances. We learn how to relax, especially on our exhale. And we learn to integrate things that come up, because I don't know what's going to come up for you today, but whatever it is, you have my pledge that I'm going to stick with you, and we will work with it to see how this can support you in feeling more at home in your body and more free in your life. So I start out talking. People don't come in and we have them lay down and start breathing. We start out talking. I start out talking about the theory of it. what actually may happen during it. But I'm also watching. How comfortable are they with this? Do we need a little more talk? I might spend the entire first session just dealing with that safety factor. In fact, trained as a psychologist, I have a whole repertoire of questions about your birth, schooling, your sex life, all of the stages, typical interview. And I may go through that in more detail for one person in order to both get to know them, and also they have the sense that I'm knowing and accepting them and all the parts of themselves. We may do that, like I said, for an entire session, even before we get into using breathwork the next time. Generally speaking, though, sessions used to be 2 hours long. Now, 90 minutes, we can accomplish a lot. Usually the first half hour is in talking, setting up. The second hour is experimenting with the breath, which means you first start to experiment and get in with it. I watch them. Then I start to coach. We go into the middle part of the session where you do enough breathing, where sensations, emotions, experiences start to happen. We work with integrating them. Then the last maybe 15 minutes or so of the session, it's integration time. And we talk about what happened, what may be useful for them in follow-up. I give them resources, things to read, my phone number, things are going on that they're a little questioning. Generally, the more confidence and the more coaching and the more we do, I very seldom get phone calls. I want to make sure they leave feeling confident enough in themselves and their work with their breath. And then homework. That's what I do as a teacher. I always give homework. Here are things to work on. And often they even get a sheet of affirmations that I've written out for them. And so that they have a little homework assignment. Now, do a little connected breathing each day, read these affirmations, and for extra credit, journal. What did you get? What came up for you? Not journaling, oh, dear diary, today breakfast didn't agree with you. No, pertinent thing. If we have used inner child work, then I may do a little inner child exercise that they do on their own. I'm going to do some journaling about that. And then when they come back, okay, we look at what did you learn? What happened for you in doing these things?
That's great, Jim. Thank you. We've only got about 10 minutes left, and we do want to get to some questions, of having some great questions coming through. Before we do that, we would like to share your resources. You've got some great resources here. We'll put the link in the chat to Jim's website. He also has a YouTube channel with over 450 videos. You can sign up for his newsletter and his book, Breakthrough with Breathwork, Jumpstarting Personal Growth in Counseling and the Healing Arts. There's a link to that. So let's move to our questions. We've got some good questions here. Someone's asking, what is the difference between biofeedback and breathwork? And can you incorporate heart rate variability with breathwork, and how?
Biofeedback, of course, uses external machinery to give you feedback about what's happening with your heart rate variability and your breathing, which is a very useful tool. I think of breath work as a built-in biofeedback mechanism, so that people are being trained to read their own indices. But both can be used. I'm going to the Mideast next week, and I'll be teaching people there breath work, and I'm not taking a bunch of machinery along. So I'm able to support people to work with inner recognition of the indices of tension, release, and so on. So I've got absolutely nothing against it. My predilection is not what I'm called to do and to teach. And I let others work with the capnometer and machinery. Peter Litchfield got a whole PhD program in it in Colorado.
Jim, someone's asking, are there demos of you doing breathing exercises that are calming and grounding? I assume you'd have that on your YouTube channel.
Absolutely. Therapeutic breathwork is a toolbox. I've been talking about faster than normal breathing because that's something a little different than many other schools of mindfulness and coherent breathing, heart math. I use all of those things. We work with the parasympathetic nervous system and slower than normal breathing, like coherent breathing, mindfulness, pranayama. We use all of those things in order to activate the prefrontal cortex, which, when it's activated, tends to override things going on in the midbrain. Okay? Very useful tool. But sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes people have become experts at meditation, but there are things in the storehouse, in the right brain, in the implicit only memory, that they have never felt safe enough to deal with. And this is why judiciously we go in using faster than normal breathing to open up the sympathetic nervous system, and not overflood it, not re-traumatize, but you learn to relax on the exhale. So you breathe a little faster than normal, which is signaling your body, okay, more energy is needed here. What's going on? And then we open up that circuitry in the right brain where a lot of, as I said, implicit only memory is stored. And then we can reprogram that in a safe way using the right techniques at the right time in a treatment process for the right people. This is what it's about. So you learn slower than normal breathing. You learn normal breathing. I mean, eventually you're using faster and slower than normal breathing just so that we can live and breathe normally. You're not a breathing exercise all day long, just like you do exercises as an athlete to stretch your muscles and to get your endurance. Not that you're doing that all day long, but when you're on the playing field or when you're playing in life, then you have a lot more natural resources to come to you.
It's great, Jim. If we have time for one more quick question here, although breathing is something that everyone does, are there individuals who shouldn't do breath work?
This is an important question because the answer is yes and no. The answer is yes, for example, if you are in the third months of pregnancy, you don't want to be breathing real fast. But you know what? I've had women in the third month of pregnancy, and just working with easy, gentle breathing has been so stimulating and connecting with the fetus on the inside. So there's always a form of breathing that can be useful for people. But if you equate breath work with one certain type of breathing, no. I did mention one thing earlier today, which I'll just underline again. There may be a person in a severe schizophrenic process for whom any intervention at that time of giving them more tools is not appropriate until they've gotten to a place of safety where they can use it for their own good. Okay? But there are physical things, COPD, asthma. So you don't get a person breathing fast and heavy with asthma. We'll go into an asthma attack. But you learn how to help them recalculate their CO2 balance, sometimes with breath retention techniques, knowing how to hold their breath for a certain while. So again, it's operating within your scope of training, your scope of practice.
Yes. So important. Thank you so much, Jim. This has been amazing. I've learned so much, and we so appreciate you sharing your knowledge and wisdom and experience with our community. We had an amazing turnout today. So thank you so much. And we want to encourage everyone to check out all those resources we shared. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you both. This has been such a pleasure to be with you, Juliet and Clinton. And I totally champion the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Bring more resources to therapists.
That's great.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Peter Litchfield